And our way today is continuing our series, These Are Written That You May Believe, Part 8. Do whatever He tells you. Sometimes God says something to us and we're trying to manage it, to process it in our mind, and it doesn't fit our perception, doesn't fit our logic, or sometimes it even looks like He asks something which is absolutely out of our area of understanding or normality of our lives. And sometimes what He says to us is, in our eyes, some kind of shameful act because we cannot comprehend what He says. But Scripture teaches us that we should do whatever He tells us. And we will see this episode in the lives of Jesus, His mom, and servants on a Cana wedding party at Galilee. And we also see a similar story in the life of Joseph. We already talked once about it. And those stories speak about obedience. Obedience is a big word for today's topic. Obedience, definition. So what is obedience? It is dutifully complying with the commands, orders, or instructions of one in authority. And of course, God is really authority in my life and in yours as well. Or sometimes we do question His authority. But obedience is following in what He says to us in His word, by His commands, orders, or instructions. And our main story was taken from Gospel of John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. We all know this story. It is first sign of Jesus' glory when He transformed water into wine. Our first part would be verses 1 through 6. It is the beginning of the Gospel of John, and what is interesting, John immediately brought those signs of God's or Jesus' glory into account of his Gospel. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. This word Cana or Cana is very important. We'll talk a little bit more about it. But for now, we have to concentrate on a words, the third day, and a wedding. Wedding was big social event in Israel of that time. And not only in Israel, in the Middle East, it is a huge social event where people are coming together. They are in a process of preparations for many days before, and sometimes wedding can lasting weeks. Yeah. And we see right in verse 1 that Jesus' mother was there. And Jesus and His disciples had also been invited to the wedding. We see Jesus' mom, Jesus and His disciples, and also we would see servants. All those people are involved. And of course, master of the banquet. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to Him, "They have no more wine." First of all, for the wedding party, when wine is gone, and Salvation Army didn't exist at this time, so weddings were with a lot of wine. And in the Middle East, when wine is gone, it is a huge, big disaster. Actually, it is a shame. It is a shame for organizers. Shameful moment. And during that shameful moment, Jesus' mom immediately jumped ahead. Have you seen how women took responsibility on their shoulders when shameful moments occurred, or when danger moments of danger at hand? Women pretend that they are weak, or we men think that they are weak. But when dangers come, women are not so weak. They are very strong. Actually, scientists said that with the less muscles, the tissues in women's bodies a little bit different. With a less volume of muscles, women can, for example, raise up much more weight than men. There were known stories when mothers, during the process of saving of her child, raise up 900 kilos just to save her child. So they have no more wine, she said to Jesus. Probably she said that maybe a couple times, who knows. Verse 4, see how Jesus replied. He was really annoyed by this push. That was a push. And moms sometimes they are very pushy with their kids. Even when they are kids, are special ones, like in Jesus' case, like someone who has been sent by God, but mom still considers him as her child. So she says to him, they have no more wine. Why are you sitting still? And Jesus said back to her, woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied. Kind of harsh response. Why he was so strong in this reply? What do you think? Yeah, somebody. Yes, wasn't time. She was very pushy, but time didn't come yet. And Jesus was very sensitive to the time, very sensitive. There are many cases in our lives when we would like to push things, but if time didn't come yet, nothing happens. So he said woman, he didn't tell her mom. Why he said woman? Because he applied to the human nature. To the human nature. He said, hush, human nature. Be patient, don't push me. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know the time. You don't know at all what is happening here. Do not push me. This applies for every human being on this planet. Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come. So we see that right from the beginning, Gospel of John tells us about hour of the Lord, hour of the Messiah. And this hour is connected with the wedding party, with celebration. Prophetic picture, pure prophetic picture. Verse 5, his mother, wasn't stopped. And what she says here is absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. She was a very unusual woman, I can tell you. In front of everyone, his mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. How did she know that he would tell something to the servants? See, she really put Jesus in a place where he has no way back. She really puts him in a plate. Even he said to him, my hour has not yet come. And now she placed servants in a very interesting situation. Servants are involved too, and they showed us great example of obedience. So obedience is really pictured well here in servants, first of all. Also it speaks to us that God sees us as his servants. And actually servants didn't have even choice to deny what Jesus would say to them. Verse 6, nearby stood 6 stone water jars. Also number 6 is important. We will talk about that a little bit later. The kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing. Also important statement. Each holding from 20 to 30 gallons, which means up to 115 liters. And weight was approximately half of ton. Very heavy, huge vessels, stone vessels. See how detailed John in his gospel. Why? Because it is very important. It's not accidentally being placed here. And archaeologists discovered recently in Jerusalem, it's called burned house. Ceremonial washing before eating was a very important ritual for pious Jews. It is significant that these jars were made from stone, not pottery, and that they were large. Professor Alan Miller describes how archaeologists have found similar stone jars in Jerusalem. Archaeologists have found several stone jars in the ruined houses of first century Jerusalem. At least 6 of them stood in the basement kitchen of the burned house. They are 65 to 80 centimeters tall, each cut from a block of stone that could weigh as much as half a ton. They were shaped and finished on a very big lap, giving a pedestal foot and simple decorations. Such stone jars would hold large quantities of water for washing and kitchen needs, up to 80 liters. Actually, those a little bit smaller than we have here. Flat discs of stone served as lids. The jars at Cana may have been similar to this. Also, ceremonial washing is important process because without ceremonial washing, you are not allowed to participate in a wedding ceremony. So basically, permission to participate could be given to you if you pass through the ceremonial washing. And this is important fact because we will see that those jars were filled by the different liquid, not by the water for ceremonial washing. But first, again, I just want to remind you, I wouldn't read all chapter, don't worry, just several verses. But those verses are important in order to understand what Jesus' mom said to servants. Do whatever he will tell you. Go to Joseph and do what he tells you, said Pharaoh. So it was done before Jesus coming, a long time before. Genesis 41, verses 41 through 57. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger, which means authority had been given to Joseph. Also to stamp the contracts and papers. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. Very interesting tradition of recognition when, have you seen men with a big golden chains around their neck? A very ancient tradition. It speaks about wealth, it speaks about high social status, but God gives to us absolutely different truthful statement about something which we have to bind around our necks. From book of Proverbs chapter 3 we read, let not kindness and truth forsake thee. Bind them on thy neck. Write them on the tablet of thy heart. So you see here that kindness and truth can forsake us. Doesn't matter how many months and years we've been in the church or with the Lord, they can leave us if we wouldn't bind kindness and truth around our neck. What does it mean? It means that wherever we will turn. Have you heard this expression that man is a head and his wife is a neck? Have you heard this expression? So it is better to have kind and truthful wife. Otherwise our head would be turning in different directions and those directions wouldn't be right. So in this case, kindness goes first. Wherever we will turn our head, kindness or mercy goes first. Because if truth will go first, we would be killers of men, or will become eventually. So we have to, by turning our head, we should reveal to people kindness and mercy of the Lord, not our own, because our own is limited. And then truth. Bind them around your neck and write them on the tablet of thy heart. Do you know that tablets were out of stone? So what God says here, even if your heart is out of stone, I am able, with your help, to write it on your stony tablets. And then you will be fixed in my truth. You will be with me forever if you will allow me. And also it is painful. It is painful when something had been done on a stone. It requires, force. And sometimes it is a painful process, but God says, and verse 43, he had him ride in a chariot as his second in command. And man shouted before him, make way. So first followers of Jesus in the history of humanity called themselves followers of the way. And here we see that servants were shouted before Joseph, make way for Joseph to pass on. So same today, God says to us, make way for my son to pass into your life. Because if you will make way for him, you are obedient to him and you are his servant. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. So when we make way for Jesus to come into our lives and even to enter into every area, it means that he is in charge of our lives. And very interesting, verse 44 also, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all Egypt. Do you see parallelism here? Do you see a parallel between what Pharaoh said to Joseph and what God says to us? If we are obedient to Jesus. If we are His servants, then without His word, we shouldn't move our hands or feet. And verse 46 says that he was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So now you can imagine you are 30 years of age and you are in charge of the whole most advanced country in the world. Can you imagine? Just remember where you've been when you've been 30. And then we see in verse 51, Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." We see here two things which prevent us from effective leadership. Two things. First one, what? Trouble or troubles. And second one, what? Our family traditions, our family demands, our culture and everything else, which is connected with our father's household. So what God has done with Joseph, He made him to forget troubles and to forget his father's household, because his father's household was what? Dysfunctional. Dysfunctional. So He cut him off and let him grow under his own supervision. God really became his father. The second son he named Ephraim and said, "It is because God has made me" what? "Fruitful in the land of my" what? "Suffering." So when suffering comes to our lives, it helps us to be what? Fruitful. If we what? Forgot troubles and our father's household. See how important those two verses. And those two sons became heads of the tribes. Now, by the wisdom and revelation, Joseph was very skillful and he collected many goods. And verse 55 we read, "When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food." When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the absence of food, the absence of the means of life. Time will come on the whole earth when this famine, spiritual famine, physical famine, troubles will take over the world, and people will start crying to their leaders for food, for provision. Then Pharaoh, he turned their attention toward whom? Joseph. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." Exactly what Jesus' mom told servants when famine came. So in this situation of Cana wedding party was real famine because wine was gone. The main source of joy was gone. So joy is very important for a wedding party. And then when famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. And verse 57, "And all the countries, other countries, came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph." So it is really a prophetic picture about future, because the famine was severe in all the world. Now we're coming back to our story, last part, verses 7 to 11. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So now imagine situation. Absence of wine. Empty jars. It may be easy to us, but it is absolutely not easy for servants. Absolutely not easy. Because something out of their area of understanding happens here. Fill the jars with water. So they filled them to the brim. He didn't tell them, but he filled them to the brim. You know what it means? No more space for water for washing, for ceremonial washing. No more space, up to the top. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." So now imagine. First he told them, do you remember last Sunday we've talked, I see same nature of God. He says something which is small. It is not big deal to fill jars of stone with water up to the brim. It is not a big deal because they anyway for the water, right? So they've done it. They filled up to the brim. Now he says, draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. Sorry, it is not a wine. It is water. Yeah. For servants, can you imagine picture in their head, what are we so stupid? Are we idiots? What should we do? Bring water to the master of banquet in front of everyone on a wedding ceremony? Great challenge beyond human comprehension, and also great measure of trust and obedience here. Great measure. It is beyond our comprehension. So when we are obedient to God, it is not matter of our comprehension, human logic, human perception, or human understanding. Obedience goes beyond our limits. It is not about our mind, it is about His mind. So it is also a challenge. Obedience is always connected with challenges. They did so, verse 9, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. My question to you, if servants wouldn't be obedient, if they would ask Jesus, why should we bring water to the master of the banquet if there is a lack of wine? Why should we bring water to him? Would then water to be transferred into wine? So who is involved into this miracle? Jesus, faithful, obedient servants, right? His mom, who jumped before the hour. And now we see master of the banquet. Master of the banquet did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. And why servants knew where this wine came from? Why they knew?
Because they were obedient to Jesus.
Exactly, because they were obedient to Jesus. They were obedient beyond their comprehension, or far off their human limits, but now they've got knowledge. So when we are obedient to God without, discussions, arguings, then we get knowledge of supernatural, or knowledge of who God is. Without obedience, it is not possible to know who God is. Or we can know who He is inadvertently in a bad way. Then master of the banquet called the bridegroom aside and said, so now we see normal human world. Everyone says master of banquet. Not true. Not everyone. Everyone brings out the choice wine first while people are well in their conscience. And then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. So what is normality for this master of banquet? To be deceptive, right? Deception is absolutely normal thing for this world. And he says everyone, which means no exclusions. But he has no knowledge of who God is. And servants do have this knowledge. But you have saved the best till now. So how this fact, you have saved the best till now, how this fact speaks about who our God is. How it speaks about His character.
He always gives us what is best for us.
But does He patient? Is He patient? Is He waits until our wine will be gone? Does He mixes our wine and His wine? And you know what wine represents? It represents joy. It represents also, do you remember those stone jars? They were for ceremonial washing. So Jesus filled really, not by water, those jars with the help of obedient servants. He filled those jars up to the brim by wine. And wine represents also blood of the new, absolutely new supernatural washing, eternal washing. Because when you do water ceremonial washing, you have to do that every time before your meal or before your wedding ceremonies. If you will be doing once ceremonial washing by Jesus' blood, you will be clean. And also wine represents joy. God doesn't mix our joy and his joy. It doesn't work well. He is patient enough until our joy will be gone, and then his joy will step into the plate. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory. And his disciples believed in him. Because of servants' obedience, his disciples believed in Jesus. Do you see that? Disciples do not go here first. They go after the servants. Actually, they were really Jesus' disciples because they were obedient and faithful. Now, I promised to you to talk about Cana. Cana is very important. John, I want to tell you something. John would never say to you the city name or village name without absolutely special meaning of it. There is a second message in the names of the villages or cities. Cana from Hebrew means reed, or in Hebrew language a measure of length in the form of a cane stalk or a leg. Cana or kana as unit of measure 6 cubits. 6 cubits. How many stone jars were in the 6? Not accidentally. This is specifically had been ordained by God. Also it means shaft of lamp stand. Branches of lamp stand also mean Cana. Do you remember Book of Revelation? Book of Revelation? Do you remember the structure of God's supervision over the churches? Do you remember? Those 7 spirits, and Jesus walks among those 7 spirits, and those 7 spirits, they oversee churches on this earth. So it is a global, huge image of the Church of God. Right from the beginning, Jesus brought this sign about his glory, because his glory in global picture revealed to this world through the Church of God, to the Church of God. And this world measures God's glory by us. By us. When they see us, we like this measure of length. Last picture, just prophetic picture for uplifting of our spirits. Isaiah chapter 9 verses 1 through 3. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. In the past, he, which means God, humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. Isaiah really opens picture for us. It is not accidentally that Jesus performed this miracle at Cana, because Cana, Galilee, represented whole nations. Actually, in Israel, Galilee was considered as a dark area of people who are in darkness. They not righteous enough, they not good enough, and they probably would never be good enough. That's how Israel was looking at Galilee region. But what Isaiah says, in the future, God will honor Galilee of the nations. So every nation would be honored by God by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. And the way of the sea, basically, it is a way of prepared mass destruction. Because sea in prophetic language represents abyss, bottomless pit where people are drowning, where nations are perishing. And by this way, beyond the Jordan, God already, in his mind, prepared the future of honor for the nations, to save them from mass destruction. That's what Isaiah says. In verse 2, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. Please note transformation. Verse 1, he says, will honor Galilee of the nations. In verse 3 he says, you have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. Do you remember I told you that wine represents joy? Instead of ceremonial religious washing through those stone jars, Jesus filled up by the obedient servants, filled up by the water, which was transformed into wine. So God prepared great joy, verse 3. And also from nations in Galilee, he created the nation of his children. Hallelujah. And they rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest. At the harvest, because it is really a harvest, divine harvest of the nations, who became the nation, the family of God. Those wonderful words are last what I wanted to tell you today. And also, I really blessed to see how you respond on God's call in your lives and also on God's call in my life. And may your joy, which came from God, will increase and will be supernatural, because those servants, amazing people, they filled up to the brim. How amazing they acted on very strange request from Jesus. And of course, probably they knew that he is a strange kind guy, because in Israel, word of mouth was very much spreaded around. So they decided to fill that up to the brim. So when God says something to me and to you, it is better to do up to the brim. We shouldn't do a little bit, because we never know what kind of result we will reap from it. Later we can say, why I didn't feel this up to the brim, otherwise I could have so much joy, now I have just little. So if you wish, raise your voice, ask God about something, or just praise Him for what He has done in your life. Hallelujah. Servants really were the people who touched my heart in this story. Servants, obedience servants. We even do not know their names, but I'm sure God knows their names. He knew them up from the beginning of their coming to this earth. And again, those seasons, coming to this earth, departing from this earth, everything is under God's guidance. And there is a wonderful Psalm 113 about servants of the Lord. Praise, O servants of the Lord. Praise the name of the Lord. Let the name of the Lord be praised, both now and forevermore. From the rising of the sun to the place where it sets, the name of the Lord is to be praised. May God transform every water of religion in you and me into the wine of joy, because we are also vessels. And do you remember, as those stone ones, sometimes we walk like robots. And God doesn't want for us to be those stone jars just for religious water of purification. He wants for us to be vessels filled with His joy up to the brim. So please allow Him to do that. Just allow Him. May God bless you. Thank you.